to the Oblivion Bar Podcast with your host, Chris Hacker and Aaron Knowles.
We're going to go ahead and get into our main topic. And Aaron, this is so funny that we decided to do it this week because if you remember in episode 13, very off the cuff, just randomly, you had said, we were discussing Chris Evans and you had said, we should talk about Chris Evans and all his comic book roles. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about Chris Evans and his history with comic book movies.
That sexy specimen of a man.
He is what we all want to be. Every man wants to be him. Every woman wants to be with him. You know, he's the greatest. So
it's really like that scene in Captain America, the first Avenger, when they open up his casket, his pod after they've zapped him with the Vitares, you know, and he's just like sweaty and glistening. And I'm not fangirling over here or anything, but it's just like, that's what we all want to happen. We were like, yeah.
Even Haley Atwell like goes up and touches him. It's like, oh,
yes.
Like she's like so blown away by it. And during doing research for this episode, there's a fun little trivia thing on IMDb that said that Haley Atwell, the very first cut that they show Chris Evans all greased up out of that pod, her response is what ends up in the movie because she is genuinely surprised and like shocked by this specimen that's in front of her. So Chris Evans, like we talked about here, has been in a plethora of comic book movies, and we're just going to quickly go through all of them and then discuss them in some capacity. So, Aaron, why don't you go ahead and start us off with the very first comic book role of Chris Evans?
Okay, so 2005, 2007 was his grand entrance into the comic book world, right? With Fantastic Four, he played Johnny Storms.
Now picture that, but everywhere. It was everywhere. What?
The cloud has fundamentally altered our DNA.
Cool!
We need to find Ben.
And you know what, guys? I think I was fine.
So while Paul Walker was considered for the part of Johnny Storm, Chris Evans was ultimately cast. In an interview on the Hollywood Reporter's Awards Chatter podcast, Chris Evans opened up about taking on the role of Johnny Storm early in his career. When discussing taking the part of the Human Torch, Evans said, "That was back when the superhero thing was just taking off." That's another pun because he could fly. He goes on to add, "I had just been dumped and I needed it." Well, thank you, Johnny Storm, aka Chris Evans. We all needed that.
We should actually be thinking Kate Boswell because that's who broke up with him. I mean, probably not the ultimate reason why he decided to do it, but it sounded like he's always been, it's very famously known that Chris Evans has always been very apprehensive about joining huge franchises. There are many interviews of him discussing how he wishes that during, especially when he took the role as Captain America, he was very, very excited about the fact that they wouldn't just be filming back-to-back movies. He says like Twilight is the example of a series that he would never want to be a part of because they're just filming him. That's like your career for 8 to 10 years. You're just filming these movies back to back to back. So when he decided to take Johnny Storm, this was his first stint in the comic book world. And I know those movies aren't often praised as far as like they haven't aged well, obviously not a great adaptation. There's a lot of things wrong with those Fantastic Four movies, but I think Chris Evans' role as Johnny Storm is often praised as one of the highlights in that world, and I think we've talked about it here on the show, even talking about Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Wouldn't it be something if a couple years from now we're watching Doctor Strange 2 and we see Chris Evans roll up in a Johnny Storm, in his old suit, in his old Fantastic Four suit? That would be really cool.
That would be great. Another thing that this kind of reminds me of is just like what you just said about Chris Evans taking on the role, his apprehension of taking on the role of Captain America. Mm-hmm. We were talking about Robert Pattinson and his upcoming The Batman film, and him actually talking to Chris Evans. And I think that is more impactful now that I think about it because, if you really understand why he was apprehensive about taking on such a role, he finds the roles important. He wants to do them justice. Again, that's another pun because of Batman. Right. And so it really makes sense that, that Robert Pattinson would go to somebody who really just wanted to do the role justice. And I think that for me, that actually, connecting those two and what you just said brings Robert Pattinson a little bit higher up in my mind. I praise him a little bit more for why he did that.
He's asking the right people, the right advice,
Yes,
of course.
Yes.
And I think, again, doing research for this, when Fantastic Four 3 was announced but was being planned, the only two people that were on, like for sure we're going to do it again, was Michael Chiklis, who plays the Thing during that movie, and surprisingly enough, Chris Evans. He was ready to come back for a third movie. I think all the actors had been scheduled and contracted to do 3 movies, but of course it was later decided to not do that. And very briefly after that, he decides to go on and play another comic book character who we'll get to, or another Marvel character, who we'll get to here in a bit. Moving on here, we have in 2007, he voices the character Casey Jones in the TMNT animated movie.
You think you own these rooftops? I happen to think you could use my help. And I could use a sidekick. You may have everyone else fooled, but you haven't fooled me, Raph.
So in this one, this is kind of one of the smaller ones. Aaron, I know you like TMNT. Have you ever seen this animated TMNT movie with Chris Evans playing Casey Jones?
I have, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's, he's one of the highlights. I think it's like him and Sarah Michelle Gellar, and Patrick Stewart, I think, is in it as well. And it says here in our transcript that it was the number one movie in the U.S. in its opening weekend, bringing in $25 million, and widely considered to be, at that time, one of the better adaptations of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But I think it's aged terribly. Is that correct to say?
They really took some late 90s and early 2000s approaches to this reboot, and I would have to look back into it and see like the production notes and see if this was one that was potentially shelved, because it's like for a while before it actually came to production, finalized. Because a lot of the stuff, they basically in the movie, in my opinion, they turned the Ninja Turtles team into lackluster superheroes, which they are superheroes to a degree. Sure. But, they gave like Raphael this motorcycle and suit of armor. They put him up against more mystical creatures. Like it was just, to me, it was very oddly put together. And it just didn't really flow very well. Now, I did enjoy the voice acting. I did enjoy the quality of the graphics that they had. It was completely all computer animation, but really it did not really hit the mark for me. Like, I've seen better animated shows, like the first run of the Nickelodeon reboot of Ninja Turtles. To me, was better and was more of an improved animation for a television show than this movie was. And even the storyline was great. They had David Tennant. They had a lot of people jumping into the voice acting for that show. And this, you're right, exactly what you said. This one does not really stand the test of time. Mm-hmm. It's a one and done. Like, you watch it and you forget it. Yeah, and that's probably one of the worst things you can say about an adaptation of a superhero movie, or actually just any movie in general. If it's instantly forgettable, then what's the point, right? Yeah, but I mean, Chris Evans did do a good job. He can actually voice act, which is, he's great across the board. He's great as an actor for serious shows. He's great as, having some comedy value put in there. Like, I know that reference, so he's, and then to be able to voice act is another, it's a whole nother thing. It's a whole nother world in the industry, and he can still do it. So it's good to know. Yes, absolutely. He absolutely is. He's very versatile as far as an actor goes. You'll see here coming up here soon, he plays a very comedic role in The Losers, and I thought he was the best part of the whole movie. But we'll get to that. No spoilers. We'll go ahead and move on here to a movie that I actually just recently watched last night, because this is the only of all these films we'll be talking about with Chris Evans. This was the only film that I had not seen of his, and that is 2009's Push.
It's Cassie, right? Mm-hmm. Enjoy your food.
That's it?
That's it. Sorry, some 12-year-old that knew I needed a new toothbrush isn't enough to get me involved with division, even if it's not a con.
I'm 13, and I've been told that I look at least 14.
Right.
And this is not a con. This is a way for everyone to get something that they want.
I've actually used that line before.
Fine. Don't believe me. But you will help me.
Really? Getting a message.
So Chris Evans actually he does play Nick Grant, but he is actually a telekinetic, so he can but his powers are very here and there. It doesn't really.
If I remember correctly, there's like 4 types. There's pushers,
Sniffer.
there's sniffers, there's
one's like a shadow where they can like shield people from the big one. Like the most powerful is the guys who can like find people. They can find other superpowered people in this world. And I want to quickly, just for a second, talk about Push and how this was an original idea. It was actually not an adaptation from a comic, but before the movie came out, there was a tie-in prequel published by Wildstorm, which is an imprint through DC Comics. So technically it is a comic book first, then a movie. So this is kind of cheating here with Push. But if you watch the film, it is very comic centric. It's very based around superheroes, and it's very 2009. I'll tell you that. I will say too, while watching this, the bad guy is Jaimin Hansu. I hope I'm saying that correctly. He is again, like I said, the bad guy in Push, but he has been in a lot of superhero movies.
Almost as many as Chris Evans.
Yes, almost as much as Chris Evans, because he plays Korath in Guardians of the Galaxy and in Captain Marvel. He plays he's King Riku in Raikou. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly. In Aquaman, he is the Grand Wizard in Shazam. He's Midnight in Constantine. There's one other one that I'm forgetting here. Oh, he plays Black Panther in an animated movie as well. So he's been in quite a few. If we're doing Chris Evans today because he's been in so many comic book movies, but Jaimin, I guarantee we could probably do a similar episode with all of his roles as well.
Okay, so listen to this. So the different types of psychics in the film are movers. They can move objects with their minds. Pushers control other people's thoughts. Watchers, they can see the future. Bleeders emit a high-pitched scream that can burst blood vessels. Sniffers track people and objects. Shifters temporarily change what an object looks like to others. Wipers, they can wipe memories. Shadows cloak themselves and others around them from detection. And then Stitchers, they can heal or unheal people.
Yeah. So briefly, while we're on the subject of Push, I thought Chris Evans, he's the main character of the movie. A young Dakota Fanning is his like partner in crime. And what do you think about this movie, Aaron? Because I watched it, and again, I wasn't really into it. It's very 2009. There's a reason why it doesn't really have much of an imprint on his career.
I liked it. I wanted more. This was one that it actually really did stick out to me, because it talks, it has the whole government controlling, people with superpowers, people looking out for each other, people trying to hide, people using their powers to go against cultural norms. There's so much in this, and it's so multifaceted when it comes to actually how they use their powers. And I feel like this has actually been more of a blueprint to a lot of newer movies, and sure. I would hope that people like you've seen some of the stuff that's on Netflix. Have you seen Code 8? Code 8 is another one where people with powers are trying to be regulated, or not trying to, but they're being regulated by the government. They're being hunted down, and it's just, there's been many movies that I feel could take something from Push and make it better. If not, Push could improve itself with like a sequel. And again,
sure.
Like I said, when I watched this movie, it did have a lot of comedy. I'm not a huge fan of Dakota Fanning. She's a little too much of a whiny character in most of the stuff that she plays, but she did a pretty good job kind of trying to be a badass in this film.
She's like a wise beyond her years in the film.
Yes.
She's like 13, I think, in the film.
And they do a pretty good job of kind of having those government organizations using the people with powers against them. Like, for instance, if you've seen Logan, Logan was to me had a similar view of mutants, a similar idea, So again, I could say that, I would think that a lot of producers and writers may have seen this movie and kind of taken a lot from it. So I think it was a good,
it was influential. It was influential for later.
Yeah, I'd say it was. I'd say it was a good installation into the comic book and superpowered scene.
Yeah, I agree. I do think it has some good ideas, and it's kind of surprising that it was just an original idea in the beginning until it was, like I said, the tie-in there. One little interesting fact about Push, and part of the reason why, one of the many reasons why I love Chris Evans was because of this is the first trivia fact on IMDb. It says, in the hotel scene there where Nick and Kira, who's played by Camilla Bell, they have a little bit of a makeout scene. And in the script, it says that Chris Evans' character, Nick, has to grab the butt like in a sexual way.
He's going to touch the butt.
Chris Evans actually refused to do this until he had permission from Bell. And Bell obviously eventually gave him permission, and it was filmed as scripted. But that's Chris Evans. I mean, not that being a normal, like, that's just the kind of character that he is. And obviously we'll get into a little bit later when he takes on his iconic role, but embodying a character that is. But that right there was just I thought a really interesting, fun fact about Chris Evans in that movie. So,
well, yeah, I mean, to me, that shows that he is somebody who is trying to set a standard. He's trying to, be an example for people, whether it's in Hollywood or for his fans, really, really exemplifying, normal and behavior that is becoming, yes, respectable behavior is what we need to pay attention to. We don't need to focus on these actors and actresses and celebrities that do dumb crap like jump on couches and then just and assault people and make that the focal point of Hollywood. We need to take guys like that who set the example and make them and show that off.
Absolutely. Aaron, why don't you go ahead and take us into our next Chris Evans role?
Okay, so Chris Evans also played in 2010. He played. It was based on DC Vertigo comic series. The Losers, is an action film that feels similar in tone to the classic A-Team TV series, and I'll actually agree with that. So it's very much. It told the story of an elite Black Ops team who faked their own deaths. A-Team, and wound up uncovering a shadowy government conspiracy. A-Team. Chris Evans played Captain Jake Jensen, who was essentially the Intel comic relief of the film. So imagine Chris Evans playing Wade Wilson.
Base 1, this is Cavalier 415. We've been in a collision with a civilian vehicle. Carvey's dead and Freeman's hurt real bad. We need medevac immediately.
Roger, Cavalier 415.
Robert De Niro, who?
We're scrambling a chopper.
Jensen, shut up. You shut up, Roke. You're dead. I'm spinal injury. Spinal injury can talk.
Base 1, this is Medevac Delta.
Yeah, he is very quippy. He is the comedic relief in the film. Also, Jake Jensen. There's a lot of alliteration with the. I mean, it is there's a comic book movies or superhero movies, so of course they're going to have a lot of alliteration. But Jake Jensen is definitely by far in a very star-studded cast. I mean, we talked about it in the previous episode, but Jeffrey Dean Morgan, Idris Elba, Zoe Saldana. Who am I missing here?
Chris Evans.
Obviously, Chris Evans, of course. But yeah, I mean, that right there, the star-studded cast. So he is, in my opinion, the best part. My favorite scene in The Losers is whenever I think this is a lot of people's favorite, but he's kind of infiltrating this tower to get some information, and he's acting like he's like an IT guy, and he's being surrounded by these security guards, and he puts up like two fingers, and he's acting like he's going to shoot them with like, telekinetic powers. While in reality, one of his team members, Pooch, is in another building across the way, and he basically shoots these two guys. And yeah, Don't Stop Believing by Journey comes on in the background. The film, we talked about this before the show. I had this like coat of nostalgia and love for The Losers for a long time. I remember really enjoying it as a 19, 20-year-old. And then as I rewatched it last night, I just a lot of things don't hold up very well. So
yeah, it's your classic, like, the reimagining of the A-Team. It's Mission Impossible. There's multiple things that follow the same formula of action team coming back from the ashes and getting their revenge on the people that betrayed them. Right. Finding out there's some conspiracy going on. So it's a classic shoot 'em up, we got to kill people to bring, our integrity back type movie,
Yeah, prove their innocence kind of thing.
Prove their innocence, yes, just like the A-Team.
Up next, we have Chris Evans in his role as another alliteration, Lucas Lee in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World in 2010.
And action.
Oh my God.
Hey, the only thing keeping me and her apart are the 2 minutes it's gonna take to kick your ass.
You dated a famous guy?
In 9th grade, we had drama. Actually, it might have been math. I just remember there being a lot of drama.
Hey!
He was a snot-nosed little brat. He just followed me around.
He had snot in his nose? But he's famous.
Hey, I'm talking to you, Scott Pilgrim.
He's famous and he talked to me.
The only thing keeping me and her apart is the 2 minutes it's gonna take to kick your ass.
Can I have your autograph, please?
What's up? How's life? He seems nice.
So this is a fun one because I just recently rewatched Scott Pilgrim, and I think, again, I love Scott Pilgrim. It's a great film. It's got a great, huge cult following. But anytime that scene where they all kind of go up to the movie set and you see Chris Evans playing very off character, this is not. He's a huge a-hole in this movie. He's an ex-boyfriend of what's the girl's name? Why am I forgetting her name?
Ramona Flowers, man.
Ramona Flowers. Thank you so much.
Ramona.
How you doing? He seems nice.
That's actually really funny.
I like how he goes, boom. And he gets yeah. He is so, I love it when Chris Evans, when he plays against character or against like who he usually plays. Cause again, a lot of these films, he's the good guy. And in this, and also in like Knives Out, he plays a pretty terrible person. And it's so funny that it shows the versatility of Chris Evans and how he can play so many different roles. So, and I think this is, although he's in the film for maybe 10 minutes, it shows how incredible he is.
I've got my own skate brand.
A thingy. It's called Grind.
Called a Grind, bro. Super trash. No, I think
he goes, big fan. He goes, why wouldn't you be?
Yeah. Yeah. He did a great job. Really just like not taking himself too seriously in that role. Mm-hmm. And I think that was one thing that made that movie so good, was it just had like all these different people that are great actors and actresses that come in and they know it's a comedy. They know it's campy. They know it's fun. And they really just have a good time with it, you know? Absolutely. And it, even Chris Evans, and he's like, so recently for charity, the entire cast got together and did like an on-screen reading, like a Zoom call reading of this show. And Chris Evans was there, and he was, the entire time he was reading, he's doing his eyebrows and it was great.
Yeah.
You know? So I love the fact that they really got together and had fun doing this, because it's just, there's no way this would have been accomplishable without the level of hilariousness that I'm sure was going on behind the scenes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It says here that Chris Evans is only on set for like 2 weeks to film his parts for Lucas Lee. So he was kind of a smaller part of the production for Scott Pilgrim, but his impact definitely made itself known for sure. Aaron, why don't you go ahead and take us into his next role?
I don't go anywhere without my stunt team.
He says, sometimes I let him do the wide shots when I want to go to my go and get blazed in my Winnie.
Yeah. So the next one is actually one of my, besides obviously Captain America, one of my favorite roles of Chris Evans. So it's Snowpiercer from 2013. It's based on a French graphic novel, Les Transperceneages, I think. I can't really
That's
speak
pretty
French.
close. I think that's probably accurate.
Transperceneages.
Curtis Everett. I've been asked to extend a formal invitation for Mr. Wilfred to join him for dinner. After you.
So Snowpiercer is a sci-fi thriller that charts a dystopian Ice Age future. Critical reception was tremendous, and Chris Evans gained particular praise. He played the starring role of Curtis Everett, an intelligent revolutionary leader. The film was directed by Bong Joon-ho, who also directed 2019's Parasite. So this movie basically is entirely set on this train. And from the front of the train, which is obviously the engine, to the rear of the train is basically a hierarchy. It's a class system. So the rich live in luxury in the front of the train, or towards the front of the train, and then the poor are all jam-packed together in the back, and they're fed garbage, they eat like crap, and they constantly try and revolt to go up to the front. There's actually a television show now, I think, that's going on. But the people, Netflix, but the people up in the front of the train have no worries. They eat fresh food. They live, a life of luxury with pools. And this train is just on a never-ending course around the world, because if it ever stops moving, then it will stop supplying power to the train. So it has almost like this turbine engine. But basically the plot of this movie is that, the people in the back are tired of living this subservient trash life, and they rise up and try and make their way towards the front of the train.
And it's funny that Chris Evans in that role, it says here, one of the facts about the movie is that Chris Evans actually personally contacted Bong Joon and asked to audition for the role. And Bong was a little bit hesitant because this character, Curtis Everett, is supposed to be this like very malnourished, very like kind of scrappy individual. And Chris Evans looks like he was sculpted from marble. So if you watch Snowpiercer now, it shows Chris Evans often in big coats and like it's trying to hide how physically gifted he is. But like you said, it's a great film. It's definitely one of those ones that I think people often, I don't know if people forget about it anymore, but for a long time, I mean, it came out in 2013 and it's just recently gaining a cult following. It's very good. And it's definitely, it's one of Bong Joon-ho's better films. And I think thankfully, because of Parasite, Snowpiercer is finally getting some love.
Yeah. And it's just like what you said earlier about, Chris Evans when he was playing in, Push, and when he was playing in, a couple of his other roles, he had to be like the asshole.
Mm-hmm.
This was a role that you would never expect him to really rise to the occasion in. I mean, there's actually a line he quotes in there where he says, he's like, "I know what babies taste like," and it's like, it's such a brutal scene, and it's insane because like, you could never imagine, somebody actually saying that, but then he says it so genuinely, and he just, I don't know, it just really speaks to his ability to act when you can really genuinely get somebody to like believe it when you say something like that. And this, I recommend this movie to anybody. People always ask me all the time, like, have you seen Snowpiercer? I'm like, yeah, one of the better movies I've ever seen, and it's so easy to find these days. People need to check it out.
It's on Netflix right now, and again, with Bong Joon hit a lot of his recent success, and obviously Chris Evans, and with his success as well, it's finally getting, like we talked about, the love that it deserves. So moving on here to our final role of Chris Evans, and I think a lot of people would agree his most iconic, maybe forever, is of course Captain America.
For as long as I can remember, I just wanted to do what was right.
You really gonna do this again?
Guess I'm not quite sure what that is anymore.
Did you have something against running away?
You start running, they'll never let you stop. You stand up, you push back.
Bucky, come on. There are men laying down their lives. I got no right to do any less than them.
Can't say no forever, right?
And I thought I could throw myself back in and follow orders, serve.
You've been asleep, Cap, for almost 70 years.
It's just not the same.
Captain, 70 years ago, you laid down your life to save how many millions of people?
If I see a situation pointed south.
And if you don't know who Captain America is, I'll give you a little brief synopsis, although I don't know anybody who doesn't know who Steve Rogers is.
Get out from under that rock you're living in.
Right. In 1942, America has entered World War II, and a sickly but determined Steve Rogers is frustrated at being rejected, at getting rejected yet again for military service. Everything changes when Dr. Erskine, is that right? Erskine?
Erskine,
I don't know.
Yep.
Okay.
Erskine. Yep.
Everything changes when Dr. Erskine recruits him for a secret project, Rebirth. Proving his extraordinary courage, wits, and conscience, Steve Rogers undergoes the experiment, and his weak body is suddenly enhanced into maximum human potential. So, Captain America: The First Avenger came out in 2011. I still remember, Aaron, when we first met was back at the end of 2010, 2011 timeframe. I remember going to the movie theater, I think maybe during AIT while I was in the military. And I remember seeing that first poster of like Captain America with his head down and the shield. And it says, and the poster just said First Avenger. And we've talked about on the show that I remember downloading the trailer for Iron Man 1 on my school computer. And I've been following the MCU from the beginning. But Captain America: The First Avenger, in my opinion, and I think I can talk, speak for you here as well, in a certain aspect. Captain America: The First Avenger is really that's where my love of the MCU came from. I mean, that was the Chris Evans taking on that role as Captain America propelled me into, I will see every film now. I will watch every single Marvel movie that comes out. I probably would have either way, but that really is where the love began.
Yeah, I'm the same way because Iron Man was good, but it wasn't great.
Nah,
You know,
I think it's pretty great.
but I mean, the final fight scene.
Yeah,
I mean, it was
that's every
anticlimactic. You know,
that's every comic book movie up until like Phase 3 of the MCU.
Whatever, but I will say, like, I was not really sold on the the MCU until Captain America, the first Avenger. And I can tell you, so I actually saw it when I was stationed, when I first got to Fort Stewart, Georgia, where, you and I became friends. And there was a movie theater down the street from my house, and they were just opening up their IMAX-ish type, theater. And so the first movie that they were playing in this theater was an IMAX version of Captain America. So they actually invited a whole bunch of soldiers from Fort Stewart, Georgia, and gave them free soda, free popcorn, and they got to sit wherever they wanted.
That's a good deal.
And so I was, I got to sit amongst a whole room of soldiers from Fort Stewart, and I got to watch this movie, and it was fantastic in IMAX. And I was just like, from there on, it was love with MCU, Chris Evans, and the whole thing,
Sure. Well, like we talked about earlier, Chris Evans actually declined the role of Captain America 3 times before eventually accepting it. And he declined it not because he disliked the role, but because he feared the effects of the increased fame and the constant having to play Captain America and the barriers it would put up in his personal life and within his career as well. And it wasn't until Robert Downey Jr. convinced him to take the role. They actually sat down together one night, and Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. talked about their plans for the Marvel Universe. I think it's widely known that Robert Downey Jr. had talked about how there were plans for the Avengers and how after Iron Man 3, he was going to leave. That's why, and Chris Evans was going to take the mantle as like the head of the Marvel Universe. And that's why in Iron Man 3, it seems kind of like a swan song for Robert Downey Jr.'s character.
Yes.
And obviously that doesn't work out. He comes back for Age of Ultron.
He ends up blowing up all his suits, right?
Right. They talked about that at this famous dinner that it was Robert Downey Jr., Chris Evans, and Joe Johnston, who was the director. Yeah, Joe Johnston, I think, who is the director of Captain America, the First Avenger. They all met together and talked. And then eventually Joe Johnston leaves, and Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr. have this long conversation about what they want to do with the Marvel Universe. And of course, they are the two figureheads of that universe until Avengers Endgame. And of course, I think it was later revealed that Chris Evans, when he eventually agreed, he didn't even have to audition. There are people famously who have auditioned for that role, John Krasinski. So, obviously Chris Evans has played Captain America a plethora of times. I want to quickly go through him. He played him in Captain America, the First Avenger, The Avengers, Thor: The Dark World, which we talked about before the show. He doesn't actually play Captain America. He plays Loki, and then Loki plays Captain America. So that's not correct. I'm gonna go ahead and fix that really quick. Just kidding. Captain America, the Winter Soldier, Avengers: Age of Ultron, Ant-Man. Where's he at in Ant-Man? Is he in Ant-Man?
Ant-Man?
Yeah. What is he in Ant-Man? They're probably yelling at us. Listening in.
I don't remember. Like, I'm trying to think of when he
either.
might have been an Ant-Man.
I know Falcon is in it, but
maybe they showed a video of him, or they showed him on TV or something. Who knows?
Sure, that's very possible. Yeah,
yeah.
So we have Captain America: Civil War, Spider-Man: Homecoming, which of course he's famously and hilariously in that. Like, so what does he say? They do like that video that they show him during PE.
So, you got detention. You screwed up. You know what you did was wrong. The question is, how are you going to make things right? Maybe you were trying to be cool. But take it from a guy who's been frozen for 65 years. The only way to really be cool is to follow the rules.
And of course, he's in Avengers Infinity War. Captain Marvel. Is he in Captain Marvel? That's not right either. Is he in Captain Marvel? Sorry, everyone. I don't think he's in Ant-Man or Captain Marvel. That's my fault. And then he's in Avengers Endgame, of course. So I thought one of the more interesting facts about Chris Evans and his role as Captain America is that he was paid $300,000 to play Captain America in the first Avenger. Aaron, if you had to ballpark without looking at the transcript, how much do you think he was paid in his final role in Avengers Endgame? Just ballpark. What do you think?
$3 million.
No, he was paid $20 million for his final role in Avengers Endgame, which is just insane. And the thing is, he was the fourth highest paid actor in that movie. So he got $20 million to play Captain America, and he wasn't even the highest paid. I think it was something crazy like $90 million for Robert Downey Jr. for his role as Iron Man.
Damn.
So yeah, insane. It was widely known that for a long time, Chris Evans and Scarlett Johansson and Chris Hemsworth, they were all terribly underpaid for their roles. And it wasn't until Robert Downey Jr. came in and had meetings with Kevin Feige and company to make sure that these actors were properly paid for their contribution to the MCU. Aaron, do you have anything to add to our Chris Evans Captain America talk? I think it's widely known, not just from this episode, but from our previous episodes, that I love the character. You love the character. He's one of the best parts about the MCU. Chris Evans is a walking, talking Captain America in real life. If you follow him on Twitter, he is constantly fighting against injustice, and he stands for good. He seems like a really cool guy. Of course, we don't know this. We don't know him personally, but I think he embodies the idea of Captain America. This America is great, not because of what it is, but what it could be. And I think that's Chris Evans at his core. So do you have anything to add as far as that goes with him playing the character?
I would just kind of mirror what you said. I mean, I really, when I think of Captain America, I think of Chris Evans. Like, he really does embody the character to a T. He really is Steve Rogers, and I think that his actions show that because he's very true to his fans. He's true to people that do the right thing, that are his fans, such as he sent a real Captain America shield, obviously not vibranium, but he sent one to a young kid. I think he saved his sister or something, Oh yeah. He defended his sister from an attacking dog, and the fact that he stands up and he pays attention to what his, fans are doing, and that they're emulating, the actions of a hero or trying that he played, that's the best that he can do. That's really the best that any actor can do based on a character that they play. Cause there are going to be people. It's like, when I go to a convention, and I because I do cosplay a lot, this, when I go to a convention or I go to an event and I'm dressed as Captain America, I'm not just representing, myself as a cosplayer. I'm representing the character. And if this kid were to see me like standing over on the side of the road, like smoking a cigarette or something in my costume, that's going to destroy his dream. I've had so many little kids come up to me like, Captain America, hey, and I'm like, hey kid, you want to hold my shield? You want to take a picture? Show me your muscles, things like that. And I really think that he is setting an example that needs to be set. And if we can get more kids to really see that a person can act as a character without just being like an act for him, not just being a role. Really emulating who that person is. I think that can go, again, go a very long way because Red just said Aaron could spend an hour alone talking about how amazing Chris Evans is. And it's true, but
absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, if you really look at some of the people in Hollywood and who they portray versus what they do on behind the scenes, it does not equal up. And we need more people. And again, I really am inspired by a lot of the characters in the MCU because it seems that they've actually taken these roles and taken themselves even higher. Because to be honest, I mean, look at Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr. He's done a lot for kids as well. And that guy, who knows where he'd be without the role of Tony Stark nowadays? I'm sure that had an impact on who he would be. Or who he could be. So that's just what I have to say on it.
And Anthony Mackie, I think he understands the baton being passed to him as Captain America.
Yeah, perfect.
And it's because of what not only Kevin Feige and company did, but what Chris Evans has done with the character and how much that character means to people and what he stands for. So I think we can end this by saying thank you, Chris Evans. Hopefully we haven't seen the last of you in comic book movies. We'll do a updated version once you do a couple more movies, and thank you for your contribution to the comic book world, I guess. Yeah.